They thought he was harmless until they opened the fridge and found human remains. They called him the Milwaukee Cannibal, the quiet neighbor who lived in plain sight. To the outside world, he was soft-spoken, polite, almost forgettable. But inside his apartment, behind a locked door, Jeffrey Dahmer was hiding one of the darkest nightmares America had ever seen. This is his story. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Bath Township, Ohio. On the surface, his childhood looked normal. Suburban home, hard-working father, a stay-at-home mother, but normal was only an illusion. From an early age, Dahmer was different. He was painfully shy, emotionally detached, and fascinated by things other kids found horrifying. He collected animal bones, dissected roadkill, and stored skeletons in jars. While classmates played baseball or laughed at school dances, Jeffrey spent his hours staring into the woods, imagining what it would feel like to hold complete control over life and death. By the time he reached high school, the darkness inside him had already begun to take over. He was drinking heavily, sneaking liquor into class, and stumbling through the halls with a smirk. Teachers saw him as disruptive, but never dangerous. He played the role of a class clown, pulling odd pranks, making strange noises, entertaining his peers, but the humor was just a mask. Underneath, Dahmer was consumed by fantasies about bodies, about control, about never being abandoned again. In 1978, only weeks after graduation, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder. He picked up an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. They shared a few beers at Dahmer's house, talked about music, and for a moment, Dahmer felt companionship. But when Hicks said he needed to leave, Dahmer panicked. The thought of being alone was unbearable. He struck Hicks with a dumbbell, strangled him, and then dismembered the body. He buried the remains in the backyard before crushing the bones with a sledgehammer. He was just 18 years old, and he had already crossed the line from fantasy into reality. For nearly a decade, Dahmer kept his urges under control, or at least hidden. He joined the army, only to be discharged for drinking. He moved from job to job, drifting through life, trying to appear normal. But normal never lasted. In 1987, his dark desires erupted again. He met Stephen Tuomi at a bar, rented a hotel room, and woke the next morning to find Tuomi dead beside him. Dahmer claimed he had no memory of the act, but something inside him had shifted. Killing no longer frightened him, it thrilled him, and that thrill would drive him to murder again and again. By the late 1980s, Dahmer had moved into apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee. It looked like any ordinary one-bedroom unit, but inside, it was a chamber of horrors. Neighbors complained constantly about the smell, an odor that clung to the walls and seeped into the hallways. Dahmer explained it away as spoiled meat, bad plumbing, or tropical fish that had died. But the truth was far worse. His refrigerator held human heads. His freezer contained body parts. Large vats of acid dissolved flesh down to bone. He was not just killing. He was experimenting, trying to turn people into something less than human, something that could never leave him. Some of his victims thought they were heading out for a drink or a night of fun. Instead, they walked straight into a nightmare. Dahmer would drug them, strangle them, and then attempt grotesque experiments, drilling into their skulls and pouring chemicals inside, hoping to create a living zombie, someone who would stay with him forever. None of these experiments ever succeeded. his victims only suffered horrific deaths. The most chilling part of Dahmer's story are the moments when he almost got caught. In one infamous incident, a 14-year-old boy named Connerock Syntha managed to escape the apartment naked, bleeding, and terrified. Neighbors called the police, desperate to help the boy. But when officers arrived, Dahmer calmly explained that it was just a lover's quarrel. He said the boy was his 19-year-old partner, drunk after a fight. Incredibly, the police believed him. They escorted the child back inside Dahmer's apartment, back into the killer's hands. That same night, Dahmer murdered him. The system had handed his victim back to him. For years, Dahmer continued his killing spree unchecked. He murdered 17 young men and boys in total, leaving behind a trail of families who would never see their loved ones again. He photographed his victims, preserved body parts, and kept trophies in jars. He even admitted to eating parts of some of them, describing it as a way to make them a permanent part of him. But eventually, his reign of terror ended. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer lured Tracy Edwards into his apartment. This time, things didn't go as planned. Edwards resisted. He noticed the foul smell, the strange chemicals, and the bizarre blue barrel in the corner. When Dahmer tried to handcuff him, Edwards fought back, punched him, and escaped. He ran into the street and flagged down police. When officers followed Edwards back to the apartment, they were met with a sight they would never forget. Inside, they found photographs of mutilated bodies, human remains in the refrigerator, skulls on shelves, and tools of torture. The stench of death filled the air. Apartment 213 was not just a crime scene, it was a museum of horror. In court, Dahmer was disturbingly calm. He confessed in detail, describing each murder with chilling precision. He spoke about his failed experiments, his cannibalism, and his dream of building a shrine of skulls. Psychologists debated whether he was insane or simply evil, but the jury decided he knew exactly what he was doing. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. Over 900 years in prison, behind bars he remained an enigma. Some inmates feared him, others mocked him. He claimed to find God, even getting baptized, but his redemption never came. On November 28, 1994, fellow inmate Christopher Scarver bludgeoned Dahmer to death with a metal bar. In the prison bathroom, his skull was crushed, and with it ended one of the darkest chapters in American crime history. And yet, even decades later, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer continues to haunt America. Not just because of the murders, but because of the failures, the neighbors who smelled death but were ignored, the police who returned a child to his killer, the warning signs that were brushed aside. For over a decade, a monster lived in plain sight, and no one stopped him. It forces us to ask terrifying questions. How many monsters walk among us? How many blend in, smile politely, and hide their true selves behind locked doors? Jeffrey Dahmer was one man, one neighbor, one tenant. But inside him lived something far darker than anyone around him could imagine. He wanted control. Control over life, over death, over people reduced to objects. But in the end, he lost control. The truth escaped, and once it did, the world finally saw the real Jeffrey Dahmer. Not a quiet man, not a lonely neighbor, but a predator, a monster living next door.